Before we begin, a small invitation. Don't rush this. Don't treat it like background noise. Just stay curious for a few minutes and see where it takes you. If at any point you feel your everyday understanding wobble a little, that's a good sign. Here's the strange part. You think you know why fire burns. Everyone does. Fire is hot. Fire destroys things. Fire hurts. End of story. But that confidence is an illusion. Almost everyone gets this wrong, not because they're careless, but because the real answer is so simple it feels uncomfortable. And once you truly see it, you can't unsee it. Pause for a moment and imagine a piece of wood just sitting there, not burning. Now imagine the air around it, oxygen everywhere. They've been together for years, decades, maybe centuries. Nothing happens, no flames, no heat, no drama. But the moment you strike a match, suddenly the world changes. Light explodes into existence. Heat pours out. The wood vanishes into smoke and ash. The obvious question is, why now? This is where things break. Most people think fire is a thing, like water, like stone, like a substance that appears when you light something. But fire is not a thing at all. Fire is an event, a process, a story that only happens when conditions line up just right. And once you see that, fire becomes less magical and far more unsettling. You might be thinking, okay, so fire is a reaction. But that word hides more than it reveals. Reaction sounds neat and tidy. Fire is not neat. Fire is chaos wearing a disguise. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine billions of invisible dancers packed into a room. They're bumping into each other constantly, every second, without rest. That's what atoms do. Inside the wood, inside the air, inside you, collisions never stop. Yet despite all this motion, nothing dramatic happens. The dancers bump, separate, bump again, endless motion, no fire. Why? Because wanting something to happen is not enough. Oxygen would really like to be attached to carbon. They're drawn to each other. When they finally connect, something important happens. Energy is released, a lot of it, but there's a problem. To connect, they have to get very close first, and getting close is hard. There's an invisible hill in the way. Think of a ball sitting in a shallow valley with a deep pit just beyond a small hill. The pit is a better place to be, lower, more stable, but the ball can't roll into it unless it first climbs the hill. Without a push, it just stays where it is. Wood and oxygen live in that valley. Comfortable, trapped, waiting. This is why wood doesn't burst into flames on its own. The air around you is full of oxygen. Your house is full of fuel, yet everything is calm. The universe is patient. It doesn't rush toward its favorite outcomes. It waits for permission. That permission is heat. When you strike a match, you're not creating fire. You're tipping the first ball over the hill. You're giving a tiny number of atoms just enough energy to climb that invisible barrier. And when they do, everything changes. Here's the part that feels almost alive. When those first atoms connect, they release energy. That energy doesn't disappear. It shakes nearby atoms, making them move faster. Those faster atoms now have enough energy to climb the hill too. They connect, they release energy. That energy speeds up more atoms. And suddenly you don't have a single event. You have a cascade. Fire is not gradual. Fire is an avalanche. One reaction triggers two. Two trigger four. Four trigger eight. In a fraction of a second, billions of atoms are snapping together. That's why fire feels sudden. That's why it feels violent. It's not a steady process. It's runaway feedback. This is where the heat comes from. Heat isn't a substance. It's not a fluid. Heat is motion. It's atoms shaking harder and harder, slamming into each other with increasing force. When you hold your hand near a flame, you're not feeling fire itself. You're feeling the frantic motion of matter colliding with your skin. And the light, that's not decoration, that's energy escaping. Atoms get excited, they jump into unstable states, and when they fall back down, they release tiny packets of light. The flame is matter shouting as it rearranges itself. Almost everyone thinks fire consumes things. That's misleading. Fire doesn't eat wood. Fire rearranges it. Most of the wood doesn't disappear at all. It becomes invisible. It drifts away as gas. The solid log turns into air, and we mistake invisibility for destruction. Now let me make this uncomfortable. If fire is just atoms rushing toward a more stable arrangement, then fire isn't special. It's not rare. It's not dramatic by nature. It's inevitable. The universe prefers certain arrangements over others. Fire is simply the universe relaxing. And once you see that, another question sneaks in. Where did the energy come from? Because fire doesn't create energy. It releases it, which means it was already there, waiting, stored, trapped. Think about a tree. You look at it and think it grew out of the ground. Almost everyone does. But that's one of the greatest misunderstandings in nature. The ground contributes almost nothing. A few minerals, a bit of residue. The tree's mass comes from somewhere else entirely. Pause and imagine this carefully. Trees are built out of air, not metaphorically, literally. The carbon in wood comes from carbon dioxide floating in the atmosphere. The tree pulls it in, molecule by molecule, day after day. But carbon dioxide is stable. Carbon and oxygen are already happily attached. Separating them takes effort, work, energy. Where does that energy come from? The sun. Sunlight hits leaves and does something extraordinary. It pries carbon away from oxygen. It forces atoms into an uncomfortable separation. The oxygen is released back into the air as waste. The carbon is kept, built into structure, stored. This is where the story flips. Fire is not creating energy. Fire is releasing sunlight. The warmth from a burning log is sunlight that hit a leaf years ago. The glow of a flame is ancient daylight, delayed and concentrated. The tree spent its life slowly collecting energy, photon by photon, locking it into matter. Fire is that locked energy escaping all at once. This is why fire feels alive, its time collapsing, years of sunlight rushing back into the present in minutes. And if that makes you uneasy, it should, because if fire is just stored sunlight being released, then there's nothing special about a fireplace, or a candle, or even you. You breathe in oxygen. You eat carbon-based food. Inside your body, those atoms reconnect, slowly, carefully, the same process, the same release of energy. You are not separate from fire. You are a controlled version of it. But that realization opens a much deeper question. If fire, trees, and even your own body are just energy moving towards stability, then what is stability? And why does the universe seem obsessed with it? That's where the story really begins. Before we go on, notice something subtle. Nothing so far required magic. No special force, no secret ingredient. Just energy moving slowly or quickly toward where it prefers to be. And that should make you slightly uncomfortable because it means fire isn't an exception. It's a clue. Here's where things get strange. You might be thinking stability sounds boring, like the end of motion, like everything's settling down and nothing happening anymore. But the universe doesn't chase stillness the way we imagine. It chases balance. And balance, paradoxically, can look violent. Think about water at the top of a waterfall, calm, quiet, peaceful, but the moment it tips over the edge, all that calm turns into roaring chaos. Nothing new was added, no extra force appeared, the water simply found a lower place to be. Fire works the same way. The atoms involved were never calm. They were always moving, always colliding, always restless, but they were stuck in an arrangement that wasn't quite right. Once a path opens towards something more stable, everything rushes in that direction. This idea shows up everywhere, not just in flames. Imagine a stretched rubber band. It looks still, but it's full of tension. Energy is stored in its shape. Let go, and it snaps back. Not because it wants to move, but because it wants to stop resisting. Fire is the rubber band snapping of chemistry. This brings us to a dangerous idea. The universe doesn't care about your furniture, your house, or your skin. It doesn't care about preservation. It cares about arrangements. Fire isn't destructive in a moral sense. It's constructive in a cosmic one. It's building carbon dioxide. It's completing a story that started long before you lit the match. And that raises a question most people never ask. Why does the universe prefer some arrangements over others at all? Why should carbon and oxygen together be better than apart? Here's the uncomfortable answer. Better doesn't mean smarter. It doesn't mean planned. It means lower energy, less tension, fewer ways to move. When atoms bind together and release energy, they're not celebrating. They're giving up options. A tightly bound system has fewer ways to rearrange itself. In a strange sense, it's more constrained, and the universe loves constraints. This leads us to a concept that quietly runs everything, even though most people never think about it: disorder. But not the messy kind, not your room, not chaos in the everyday sense, something deeper. Imagine a deck of cards. A perfectly ordered deck is rare. There are very few ways to arrange it that way. Shuffle it, and almost any random arrangement looks messy. There are vastly more messy arrangements than neat ones. So if you shuffle long enough, neatness almost never appears. Fire is the universe shuffling cards. When wood burns, it turns into gases that spread out. Those gases can be arranged in far more ways than a solid log ever could. That's why fire happens easily, but never reverses itself. You never see smoke gather itself, cool down, and turn back into a tree. This is where things quietly break. Fire isn't just about heat, it's about probability. The universe moves towards states that are more likely, more spread out, more evenly shared. Fire takes concentrated energy and smears it across the surroundings as heat and light. That spreading is not optional, it's favored relentlessly. This is why fire spreads outward, why heat flows from hot to cold, why a hot object cools down, but a cold object never spontaneously heats up. And this is where time sneaks in. You feel time moving forward because energy spreads, because fire burns but never unburns, because eggs cook but don't uncook, because wood turns to ash but ash doesn't reassemble. Fire is time made visible. When you watch flames flicker, you're watching the universe move in its preferred direction, toward more ways to be, toward more possible arrangements, toward what we casually call disorder. But here's the paradox: life exists. Trees grow, animals move, you think, patterns appear. Order seems to increase, not decrease. How does that fit into a universe that prefers spreading and flattening everything out? This is where almost everyone gets confused. Life does not fight this tendency, it rides it. A tree looks ordered, but building that order requires energy. Sunlight comes in, low disorder, concentrated. The tree uses that energy to build structure, but in the process, it releases heat back into the environment. Overall, the universe becomes more spread out, not less. Fire and life are not opposites, they are partners. Fire releases energy fast, life releases it slowly. That's the only real difference. Your body is a carefully throttled fire. Oxygen flows in, carbon flows in, energy leaks out gradually, just enough to keep structures intact without collapsing them. If that control fails, if the reactions speed up too much, you don't get life, you get literal fire. This is why oxygen is both essential and dangerous. Too little, and life stops. Too much, and everything burns too easily. The atmosphere itself is balanced on a knife's edge, maintained by billions of years of plants quietly doing their work. Which brings us to another unsettling realization. Fire is not rare in the universe. It just looks rare because Earth is good at control. Stars are fire on a scale that defies intuition. Not chemical fire, but the same principle. Energy rushing towards stability. Differences smoothing out. Matter rearranging itself under relentless rules. And just like with wood, stars don't burn until conditions are right. Pressure, temperature, thresholds. Once crossed, runaway reactions begin. The universe seems calm, empty, cold, but it's filled with things waiting at the top of hills, metastable, balanced only because nothing has pushed them hard enough yet. This is why small events can have enormous consequences. A spark, a match, a collision, a tiny change that pushes a system over the edge. Fire teaches us that reality is not linear. Effects are not proportional to causes. Sometimes nothing happens until everything happens. And if that's true for flames, what else is quietly waiting? What systems in your world look stable but are only one nudge away from collapse? A forest, an economy, a climate, a star. Fire is a warning disguised as warmth. It tells us the universe is full of stored tension, full of delayed outcomes, full of stories waiting for their first sentence. And once you start seeing it this way, another question becomes unavoidable. If fire reveals the direction the universe prefers, if it shows us how energy flows and time moves, then what started this flow in the first place? Why was there energy to spread at all? Why wasn't everything already settled? That question takes us far beyond flames, into the deepest structure of reality itself. Before we go further, slow down for a second. Everything so far has been about things falling, spreading, relaxing. Fire burns, heat flows, energy escapes, time moves forward. It all sounds inevitable, but inevitability hides a mystery because none of this explains why there was something to fall in the first place. Here's the strange part. If the universe loves balance so much, why wasn't it born balanced? Why wasn't everything already spread out, cold, quiet, and done? Fire, heat, time, life, even stars only exist because the universe started in a very uncomfortable state, packed, uneven, tense, and that fact alone should make you uneasy. Imagine walking into a room where every object is stacked in one corner, perfectly balanced, ready to topple. You wouldn't ask why things fall when nudged. You'd ask who stacked them there. The early universe was that corner. Everything compressed, energy concentrated, differences extreme. That initial imbalance is the reason anything interesting ever happened. Fire is just one echo of that ancient tension. You might think the Big Bang explains this, but that's just a name. It doesn't answer the question. It labels the explosion without explaining the setup. Why did the universe begin with so much energy concentrated in such a small space? Here's where certainty dissolves. We don't know, but we can say something unsettling. The universe began in a state that was incredibly unlikely. Not impossible, just rare. A configuration with very few ways to be arranged, which means it had enormous potential to change. Fire only exists because the universe started like a tightly stretched spring, and we're still watching it unwind. Every flame you've ever seen is a tiny continuation of that process. Energy spreading, differences flattening, tension releasing. This makes fire feel less local, less small. A candle flame is not an isolated event. It's the universe continuing a journey it started billions of years ago. This is where the idea of cause and effect starts to blur. You light a match and the wood burns. That feels like cause and effect, simple. But the deeper cause of the fire is not the match. It's the fact that carbon and oxygen were held apart by ancient sunlight inside a universe that allows energy to be stored at all. The match is just the last domino. This is uncomfortable because it suggests that causality is layered. Surface causes hide deeper ones, and deeper causes often have nothing to do with human intention. Fire doesn't care why you lit it. The universe doesn't care what you wanted to happen. The rules were already written, and those rules are surprisingly indifferent. Think about this. The same process that warms your home also levels cities. The same physics that cooks food also starts forest fires. There's no moral switch, just thresholds. This is why understanding fire changes how you see responsibility. You stop asking, why did this happen? And start asking, what conditions made this inevitable? And that question scales. Why did civilizations rise? Why do they collapse? Why do ideas spread? Why do conflicts ignite? Often it's not a single spark. It's stored tension waiting. Fire teaches us that stability is often an illusion maintained by barriers. Remove the barrier, and the system reveals what it always wanted to do. But here's another layer. Fire feels directional. It goes from fuel to ash, from structure to gas, from order to spread. And we experience that direction as time. You never see fire run backward. You never see heat flow from cold to hot on its own. You never see smoke unmix. This is not because the laws forbid it. On the smallest scales, the laws don't care about direction at all. They work the same forward or backward. So why does the world insist on one direction? Because of beginnings. If you start with everything mixed, nothing interesting happens. If you start with things separated, stories unfold. The universe began separated. Energy here, emptiness there. That asymmetry is why time has an arrow. Fire is one of the clearest arrows you'll ever see. This is why watching a flame feels hypnotic. Your brain recognizes something fundamental. You're watching the universe choosing one of its preferred directions. And once you realize that, a deeply unsettling thought appears. If time is tied to energy spreading, what happens when there's nothing left to spread? When everything is even, cold, balanced, no fire, no life, no motion worth naming? That future has a name, but names soften it. It's a universe where nothing interesting can happen anymore, where all the tension is gone. Fire in this sense is borrowed time. Every flame is a reminder that the universe still has unevenness left to burn through, still has hills to roll down, and you are part of that process. Your thoughts require energy, gradients. Your memories exist because neurons burn fuel. Consciousness itself is a slow leak of stored sunlight, which means awareness is not outside this story, it's inside it. This is where things get deeply personal. You don't just observe fire, you embody its logic. You survive by delaying collapse, by keeping reactions controlled, by maintaining fragile barriers against inevitability. Life is not against the universe's tendencies, it's a temporary negotiation with them, and that raises the final uncomfortable question. If everything, including you, is riding this one-way flow, what does that say about meaning, about choice, about purpose? Is everything just burning toward the same quiet end? Or is there something profound hiding in the way we experience this process from the inside? That question can't be answered with chemistry or physics alone. It requires looking at fire not as an enemy or a tool, but as a mirror. And that's where the story must end. Before we finish, let's return to the feeling this topic keeps creating, that slight discomfort, that sense that something ordinary has been quietly exposed as much bigger than you thought. That's not an accident. Fire does that because it forces you to confront something you usually avoid. Here's the strange part. Fire doesn't just reveal how the universe works, it reveals how you think. When you first asked why fire burns, you probably expected a clean answer. Oxygen, heat, reaction, done. But the deeper we went, the more the answer refused to stay small. It pulled in trees, sunlight, time, life, the beginning of the universe itself. That's not because the explanation is complicated, it's because reality is not neatly divided. We like to imagine the world as a collection of separate things. Fire here, trees there, you over here, but fire exposes the lie. Everything is entangled in one long process. When wood burns, you're not watching destruction. You're watching a return. Carbon going back to the air, energy going back to space, differences smoothing out, the universe closing a loop. And here's what most people never notice. Nothing is wasted. The heat from the flame warms the air. The light travels outward. The gases drift away. Everything continues the story somewhere else. Fire doesn't end things. It redistributes them. This changes how you see loss. When something burns, it feels gone. But it's not gone. It's just no longer where you expect it to be. The solid becomes invisible. The ordered becomes spread. And your brain interprets that as disappearance. This is exactly how time feels. Moments don't vanish. They disperse. They become unreachable, not non-existent. The present burns into the past the same way a log burns into smoke. Fire is a model for change itself, and change is what makes meaning possible. Think about this carefully. If nothing ever changed, nothing could matter. No contrast, no difference, no direction. Meaning requires that some things come before others, that some states are preferable, that some arrangements are temporary. Fire shows you that permanence is not the default. Persistence is effort. A tree resists burning for years. Your body resists collapse every second. Civilizations resist entropy through work, structure, and cooperation. But resistance is not denial, it's delay. And delay is precious, because delay is where experience lives. This reframes a question you might not realize you've been carrying. Why does anything feel urgent? Why does time feel limited? Why does meaning feel fragile? Because it is. Not fragile in a tragic way, fragile in a valuable way, like a flame itself. Stable only if conditions are right, alive only because it's not guaranteed. Fire teaches you that stability is not a given. It's a temporary arrangement held together by flows of energy. When those flows stop, structures fade. That's not pessimism, that's clarity. And clarity gives you a strange kind of freedom. Once you stop expecting the universe to preserve things for you, you start appreciating the work it takes to keep them. Relationships, ideas, life, thought, all of them are fires that must be fed carefully. Too little energy and they die. Too much and they burn out of control. Balance is not stillness. Balance is flow at the right rate. This is why fire has always fascinated humans, not just as a tool, but as a symbol. We saw ourselves in it long before we understood atoms. We sensed that it was doing openly and honestly what everything else does quietly. Fire doesn't pretend to last forever, and neither do you if you're being honest. But here's the most important shift. Fire is not the enemy of meaning. It's the reason meaning exists at all. A universe that never changed would have no stories. A universe that was already settled would have nothing to discover. The fact that energy still flows, that differences still exist, that fires can still burn is why there is still something to pay attention to. Even this moment, even this thought, even you listening right now, you are not outside the process. You are one of its rare places where the universe becomes aware of its own burning, where energy doesn't just spread but reflects. That alone is astonishing. So when you ask why fire burns, the most honest answer is not chemical or cosmic. Fire burns because the universe is unfinished, because it started uneven, because it is still relaxing, because there is still time. And one day, far in the future, when there are no more hills to roll down, no more gradients to smooth out, no more fires to light, this entire era will be over. But it isn't over yet, which is why curiosity still matters, which is why understanding still matters, which is why paying attention matters. If this made you pause even once, if it made something familiar feel strange again, then stay with this kind of thinking. Like the video, subscribe, share it with someone who enjoys late-night questions that don't have easy answers. And most of all, leave a comment with the thought that unsettled you the most, because the best ideas, like fire, spread when they're shared carefully. And once they start, they tend to keep going.